Let's do it again. I'm recording. Nothing is blinking.
Welcome back, everyone, to your Bedroom Super Producer podcast. We are your hosts. I'm JT.
And I'm BK.
And I think that we have one of the most special episodes to date, don't we, BK?
We do. I think it's very, very special indeed. One of the electronic music duos for me that's influenced me pretty much 100% of what we do today has been influenced by these guys. These two guys from France, Daft Punk.
That's right. I'll go as far as saying on record that it is my favorite band of all times.
Wow. Okay, like you're being controversial here.
I'm going all the way, BK. Today, no holds barred.
No holds bar. Wow. Favorite band of all time. Okay. All right.
And for our listeners out there, if you're looking at the date of creation of this podcast, do not worry. I'm home. BK is home. We're doing it social distancing style.
That's right. Because we want to save the world. And if we have to watch TV, sit on our couches, and do a podcast from a distance, that's what we're willing to do.
And we have a whole lot of ground to cover today, so let's get right into it. BK, got a question for you. Favorite album?
Ooh, favorite album. A difficult question, but I'm going to have to pick not just one. I'm going to have to pick two.
Okay, I'll give you two.
I'm going to go ultimate favorite Daft Punk album. I'm going to go with Discovery.
Of course.
And second ultimate favorite album of all time, I'm going to go with the soundtrack for Tron Legacy.
Ooh, so very, very broad range of styles here. And that's part of the Daft Punk experience, isn't it?
Exactly. I think they're a band that seems to evolve on each album and showing kind of what the different sauce that they like to make, and it's not always the same sauce.
No, and it's always a very tasty one at that too.
Exactly.
All right, so
on your side?
I'll give you mine, and I'm gonna go off the beaten path quite a bit. My favorite album of all times from Daft Punk is Human After All.
Ooh, controversial.
Hey, you know what? I think that maybe, like a lot of critics, I didn't get it at first. But when I first heard Alive 2007, that's when I really went back to Human After All and appreciated all the craftsmanship, from the way they treated the guitars, from the vocals and like those super catchy vocoder and talkback hooks, and just the overall grit of that record.
Yeah, and it was a special album from Daft Punk because, like we were talking about earlier, all the previous albums usually they took a little bit longer to make. Let's say Discovery, they took 4 years, and all the previous albums they usually take quite an amount of time in between albums just to formulate the right idea or the right state of mind that they're in. And Human After All was one of those exceptions. I think they made that album in 2 weeks.
Really? 2 weeks? That's it?
I think. Yeah.
Wow, that's crazy. I wish I could do that in 2 weeks.
Yeah. But it's a challenge, but at the same time, sometimes it's good to put yourself against like a deadline or something just to see what comes out, right?
I mean, for me, they all have something very, very special. All of these albums. The remix albums, I don't particularly like. I think that they did that for the record labels, just to please them, to have some release in between like the real album releases. But each of these albums has something very, very unique that's has contributed to the sound of EDM today. And I think that's a good segue to talk about a bit of their legacy, because it's easy to see and hear the artists of today and be amazed by what they do. But sometimes when you look at history and you see that, oh, this little piece there, or this technique, or this kind of branding, a lot of it comes back to Daft Punk.
True. If we come back to what you said earlier, you were talking about Alive 2007. For me, that's kind of a marker in this whole EDM scene, because like you mentioned, Human After All, that was 2005. Wasn't necessarily well received by the critics. People didn't really understand that. They went back to something more raw, something that was more, like you said, guitar influenced. Had more of the energy of Homework than the stuff that was more synth pop from Discovery. So then people were kind of thinking they were kind of washed out, that they were out of the scene, that they didn't understand what was going on. And then they come back with this huge show, the basis for Alive 2007, this huge show in Coachella with our favorite shape, which is
the pyramid.
The pyramid. And that was, for me, I think I watched that show and I immediately wanted to go and make music. It was so inspiring, and the energy, and you saw on all the YouTube's feed, it was the start of the YouTube stuff. It was the start of people filming with their cell phones, and everyone that was there had a little 1 minute skit or something on their YouTube of that show, just to show everyone how incredible that show was. And for me, I thought that was kind of the beginning of the EDM, the EDM movement that we have these days. I think it's something that influenced all the Skrillex and all the Deadmau5 and all the Justice. That influenced them to change the way a DJ puts on a show.
I think you're absolutely right. The whole making it larger than life on stage, because prior to that, most of the DJ sets were kind of boring as a live show on its own. And then they came out with, the props, the helmets, the rig with, the Ableton Live stuff. And they really, really put the blueprint together of what it meant to create a DJ set for the new era of music, or electronic dance music.
Exactly.
Yeah. For me, yeah, I mean, obviously, everything from branding and their whole image is quite unique. You have to again remember that in the 90s, every DJ, they didn't wear costumes or wear helmets. They just basically had a t-shirt, scruffy beard, and they spin the record. Whereas
True.
These guys created a live experience from the first album, where they used looping machines. And they had the TB303 and the 909s on stage, and they were performing their music.
Exactly. Well, they were pretty much the first ones. If you go back at the beginning, at the let's say 1997, 98, 99, when they were performing Homework, their debut album, they were the first act/DJs to bring those boxes and the 303s and the 707s and the 909 on stage with them, and to sync up everything to perform and resequence their own tracks. They started doing that. Something that's very dangerous if you've ever done it before, because you open yourself to a lot of damage when something stops working or something doesn't sync up correctly. And if you look at DJs today, even today, they don't quite do that much. The majority of DJs are still on CD players synced up to their laptop. There's not that much going on. They don't have that much gear with them.
You still have the David Guettas, boasting that they'd only need a USB key to go on stage.
Exactly. They put in the mixer and boom, it just works. Yeah. So,
and I think that also from a production perspective, they really changed the landscape. I mean, they were some of the first ones to really alter the sound of analog synthesizers, putting them through guitar pedals, We're going to talk about some of the equipment they made famous later on, but they were the first ones to really push the limit on quote unquote limited machines. You know what I mean?
Yeah, of course. Well, like everyone, like from the beginning when they started to get a little bit famous and they started to get a little bit of recognition, um, people were always like thinking of how did they make that sound? How did they loop that thing? How did they do that? And I think it's true even to this day for like all the recent stuff that they've done. It's they have this technical knowledge and they have this special way of treating sound, of like you said, putting them through loopers or through different pedals or doing stuff that's very out of the box, and usually people don't even know what's going on, and that's what's incredible about them, because they have their own sound by doing that.
So let's talk about what the Daft Punk sound is from, you know, an equipment perspective. Like let's go over some of the things that they used and made famous, and how actually they changed the way some of these pieces of equipment are used.
Okay. I think, correct me if I'm wrong, I think they were like like if you go back to the beginning, I think they were even the first one using Logic to record music.
Oh, really? I didn't.
Yeah. Well, back in the days, you know that Logic, before being bought by Apple, it was eMagic.
Oh yeah.
Who was doing, right?
Like I think versions 6 and 7. So
yeah, before 7. Before 7,
right,
or even 5, even like 5 point something. It was eMagic, and I think Daft Punk, they were in the forefront of making music on a Macintosh. It was like back in those days.
Wow, that's amazing.
So Logic, part of the Daft Punk sound at the beginning. And of course, I think it was a mix of different things. We talked about samplers with the MPC a couple of weeks back. I think they were also big sampler heads. The IKS-01, all the EMU stuff.
The 950, I think too. Like the big
the
big rack mount one.
Yeah, the SP1200, the ASR10, of course, the S760, all those samplers, I think they use them. So I think they were lucky, because in a way they came at a specific point where since we're the Bedroom Super Producer podcast, we're always interested in how can we have a whole studio in a bedroom, right?
Of course.
And I think they came at a specific time where it started to happen. You could have that. All these samplers were stuff that you could buy and put in like a rack mount, and you could have that. And of course, all the different synth, or the different drum machines, the synth, the usual suspects that we talked about, the Prophets, the 303, the Roland, the Junos, drum machines, the classics, as we talked about earlier, the 909, Roland 909, Roland 808, the 707, of course, the Lindrums. So I think they were really lucky to be in a period where all those fantastic gear appeared, and you could grab a hold of them for not that much money and do all that in your own bedroom. And I think the 2 first Daft Punk albums were made in a bedroom.
Yeah. I heard an interview this morning with Thomas Bangalter saying that actually Homework was produced in his bedroom.
Exactly.
At that time, I think he was doing more of the production side of things, and then Guillaume Emmanuel, whatever his name is, did more of the DJing, or they had a kind of a synergistic dynamic to the duo. For me, I think that there are 2 pieces of equipment that and I've been looking at them on eBay for like 15 years now. First is the Digitech Talker, the famed guitar pedal that they used to make most of their vocal hooks.
Okay, that was was it on Homework, or they used it mostly after on Discovery?
So I think it started more on Discovery. If you
Right,
look
right,
at
right.
songs like, let me look at the track listing real quick. So the softer stuff like Aerodynamic, I think, Digital Love, Too Long was one of those. Veridis Quo, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Something About Us. So they had that. It wasn't a talk box per se, so it was the softer robotic sound for the voice, and that's really like the trademark. I don't think that any other band used that pedal for that vocal processing stuff the way they did it.
Well, they had that special touch, because usually I think there's a lot of stuff that they use that it's not instant gratification. It's stuff that you have to understand really what you're doing to get the specific sound. And there's old stuff that was really cheap that didn't sound too well, that you really needed to find that sweet spot to get what you want from the pedals or the compressors.
Yeah. And,
So
and whether it be a talk box or one of those guitar pedals, you have to be able to play and articulate the words at the same time. So it's not that easy to get a good performance out of these techniques.
indeed, and it's funny because I was reading this article, and a friend of the band said that Thomas was like the tech guy of the band, mostly the gear guy, like, because everything was recorded in his home studio. And he said that he told one of his friends that he reads the manual of all his gear at least once a month.
Wow.
So I
I've
found
never
that pretty.
read any manual in my life.
That's the thing. That's the thing. So everyone out there reading the manual, it's useful sometimes to get the
Yeah.
most out of your gear.
Absolutely. You're here for that. That's why I count on you.
That's right.
I
Maybe
have
not
two.
once a month, but
Yeah. Well, that might be a bit excessive.
exactly.
So I have two other pieces of equipment that I think really made the Daft Punk sound. The second one being the Ensoniq DP4. And I was looking at some Gear Sluts threads, and at some point, this guy out of nowhere said, this guy kept bugging me to buy my DP4 because he knew I had one. And at some point I asked him, why do you want to buy this old piece of, average equipment? And he said, that's the way the Daft Punk guys made their sound, And so I started researching the DP4, and in fact, at the time, it was really much like a middle of the pack multi-effects processor. Like the big studios, they had the Eventide 5000.
Mm-hmm.
Or is it the 3000? Can't remember. But one of those Eventides, and goes to show you again that the Daft Punk guys just bought, average or even low quality equipment, but made something incredibly musical out of those pieces of gear.
It's always about, like, we're always saying that people always think that it's all about having that special gear to emulate this person or this DJ or this producer. For me, it's yes, if you're trying to have a specific sound, it's interesting to have a keyboard to sound like this, or like a Moog or anything like that. But most of all, usually we want to make our own sound, right? We want to have our own personality in the tracks that we make. We want people to recognize what the special magic that we infuse in our tracks. And usually that doesn't come from a specific type of gear. It comes from the way you use a specific type of gear.
Exactly.
So it could be something cheap, as it could be something more expensive, but usually the magic can come from anywhere. So it can come from a cheap compressor, it can come from a cheap Digitech or Eventide FX module. It's really how you use it. And if you read the manual twice a month, I think you can get something out of it.
Absolutely. Just one quick note again about the Ensoniq DP4. I was listening to Aerodynamic this morning, and after watching, a demo on YouTube, the guy came up with this harmonizer patch on the DP4, and it sounds exactly like the way they have the keyboards line up. I don't know if it's a fifth or a fourth or whatever the harmony is, but I think that that's how they achieve those super complex synths on Aerodynamic. It's really something.
Yeah, it's always fantastic sometimes finding patches or finding sounds that mimic a specific sound from an album, except that you find it 20 years later, but still, it's still exciting.
Yeah, I wanted to buy one when I heard that patch, and they go for like $1,200 now, $1,400.
It's super expensive. Like
yeah. They were like $500 back in the day. So
exactly, yeah.
And last piece of equipment that I think we need to talk about, and it's not just Daft Punk, but the whole, filter house or French house movement, and it is the Alesis 3630, the famed compressor.
It's a pretty cheap compressor.
Yeah.
It's not a super expensive compressor, but it does the job. It's a pretty good compressor.
Yeah, I think that the whole, because they have like left and right sidechain inputs on there, and I think that the way these producers just had the 909 go in there with the kick and duck the whole mix, because at that time it wasn't just like an instrument or a bass track; they would duck the whole track, and that's kind of what the whole French sound came from.
Yeah, I think you could combine multiple compressor and link them like with the gate. I think that's what was interesting, because the 3630 it's a stereo compressor.
Yeah, exactly.
I think you could feed the gate from one to another. I'm not too sure, but I think that's what usually they did.
No, like I said, you have an input on the back. Like you have a sidechain input for the left and the right, and so you can basically, have this a stereo signal coming in and acting as a sidechain for the whole thing that's going through the compressor.
Yeah.
And again, I was listening to some demos on YouTube, and there's something about analog gear, the way, because obviously now I'm using not OTT but LFO Tool for all of my sidechaining duties. But listening to those demos, there's something just a tiny bit different about the reaction time of the compressor on the whole ducking thing. I don't know. To me, it feels more natural, if that makes sense.
Well, it depends upon the circuitries. Depending on which compressor you're using, it's gonna be maybe a little bit smoother, a little bit more rounded than something that you can like do in the machine. So, I think it's a question of mixing the best of both worlds. I think Daft Punk, what they did is that they used the digital side of the whole sequencing that was feeding all the external analog gear, and that's what made their sound magical. So they had a computer that was feeding in MIDI or triggering all the external stuff, and everything was synced together. So I think that's what we feel today. Maybe when we're always in the box, because we're always listening to something that's pretty. It's not dry because we have many tools today to undry the tracks. But I think you're right. The fact that you're going through something that's going to heat up a little bit, that's going to react a little bit differently when the unit isn't at the right operating temperature, and it's going to have a little bit of noise here, noise there, hum here, hum there. It adds sometimes that organic feel that sometimes we feel is missing.
Big fan of the hum. Personally,
the hum.
Whenever I load up the RC20, I need that tape hum.
You put, well, maybe not the 60 cycle hum from electricity, but just to add a little bit of character. Not always, not background noise hum.
So moving on, we touched upon their live setup, but what struck you, especially when they started the whole Alive tour? What struck you as different from their live setup?
Well, it was a bit different. Like because what we were talking before was mostly what they used in the studio for the beginning of like their first two albums, and that they brought that gear to their DJ set. For a live 2007, I think it was a little bit different. They had, I think, the Moogs, the famous the Voyagers that they like. If you take a look at the pictures of inside the pyramid, like they each have two rack mount Voyagers on each. Like each of them has two, so they have four rack mount Voyagers on stage. They also, I think, they trigger everything. Everything is in the heart of the pyramid, so all the additional synth that they're using are inside the pyramid, rack mounted, and they're triggering everything via Ableton. That's also very different from before. Back in 2007, if you wanted to have a touch interface, a touch control interface, you would use a lemur. I don't know if you remember those.
Yeah, the first touchscreens. Yeah,
the first
you could program any effect, visual or sound, whatever.
Exactly. They were super expensive. I think they was like $1,500 for like one screen, and it only did one thing. And like for all those younger listeners out there, 2007, that was pre-iPad, by the way. The iPad was in 2010, the first iPad. So
yeah.
That's why all the touch interface was so expensive.
So do you think that they had like macros on Ableton and they basically did their filter sweep from the lemur? Is that what they did?
Honestly, I don't know exactly how they do it. Because I think for the Ableton stuff, they were controlling with they had also these Behringer, these mix faders, Behringer with the knobs. You know, you remember I had one.
Yeah.
So pretty much they would control Ableton with that, and then I think they were able to control some of the synth, like live ones with their Voyagers. I don't know exactly what type of setup they had with the lemur. That usually you can't really find that. You would need to ask them.
That's why you bought the Behringer, didn't you? You saw the pictures and you said, "Huh, they have a MIDI knob control surface. I need to check this out."
Well, that and the fact that it was cheap,
right?
I think.
So again,
I saw them using that. Who used it? Breakbot also had that.
Oh yeah,
like
I didn't know
Breakbot didn't use a normal like DJ controller or whatever. He had Ableton and he used the Behringer, the BCR 2000 for all the gearheads out there. So pretty much everything was around the Voyagers and Ableton. So that's what we can understand from the latest rigs, and everything else was in the heart of the pyramid.
Yeah. So if you listen to a live 2007, you can clearly hear what they're doing from an Ableton perspective, like the time stretching and all of that. I still can't quite hear, original Voyager parts in that live set though. I don't know why, but to me, I feel like it's for show. Like they don't really use the Voyagers all that much in their live sets, but I could be mistaken, but I don't know.
I think what they do with the Voyagers is that they feed MIDI tracks from Ableton directly into it. So they can mangle the different parts and they can play with the filters and everything of the specific parts of their tracks. And I don't think they do it all the time.
So they would use the Voyagers as filters, basically.
No. Like you feed a MIDI track from Ableton to the Voyager, so you can.
Right. Okay. Sorry. Okay.
So you redo the whole synth part, except you have it live, and you can switch presets. You can make it sound like something else. You can like have another sound or.
So if they have four, they'd have only four parts. Like I wouldn't imagine that they'd change the presets on any of those during the show. You know what I mean?
It depends. I think you can send control data from Ableton directly. I think that's gonna change your preset too. Yeah.
If they did that, they were again really ahead of their time doing that.
Well, that pyramid was pretty ahead of there was no one who had that type of visuals back then.
Yeah.
No one.
Well, even to this day, I mean, aside from, probably Dead Mouse and maybe Hammond Tobin, nobody really has those theatrics in their live set.
Well, but it's expensive, and it takes, usually you need a team of people. It's more people, more tour buses. It's long. It's pretty difficult to pack up one of those rigs to have everything synced up. I think like Eamon Tobin, where we were talking about the big shows that he did recently, I think it was something like 3 buses or 3 trucks or 4 trucks just to
Wow.
carry around everything, or like it was the biggest container that they could have to be able to ship it overseas, or it was something pretty, like all these the cubes that he used. So it's expensive also, like even the pyramid thing, the Alive 2007, I think it was something like Daft Punk, they had maybe a team of 10 to 12 people just to be able to run that show. It wasn't just them.
Would you say it's worth it?
Well, for the impact that they executed and they had on the whole business and on the whole EDM scene, I think it's a good thing to put on a good show than just to push play on your CD DJ.
And then you start like the 3D animations in the background and you call it a day.
Yeah, exactly. So it depends how you see it. I think it's worth it. It's like people are still talking about today about that 2007 Coachella show. And it's been, what, 25 years, 30 years?
So let's expand even a bit more on their brand, because especially for younger composers nowadays, it might seem difficult to like make a dent or get the attention that you feel like you deserve in a super crowded sea of producer DJs or whatever it is that your act is. And I think that we can definitely learn how to distance ourselves from the pack, looking back at what Daft Punk did as early as the early 1990s.
I think the first thing they did was, first of all, I think they weren't in a hurry. They really took time to craft the music into something that they really liked, something very special to them. I think that's one of the first thing. And the first thing, I think, I was reading this interview with Pedro Winters, their old manager, the headbanger owner, and he said that one of the first thing that they did when they were looking for to get signed by a record label is that they didn't sign the first thing that came in front of them. They really looked for an agreement that would let them have a total artistic freedom.
Yeah.
Not just sign 5 albums and then be stuck with something that you're not happy with, and then you get into all that Taylor Swift mayhem and stuff that you don't own nothing. And when they signed, I think it was a Scottish, I think it was a Scottish techno label or something back in the days. And they, even before they had finished their albums, I think they signed deals that they would own their masters.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So for me, that's very, like, you're thinking ahead of time. You're not just thinking about getting popular and getting signed and making money and everything. You're thinking of the future. So imagine if they hadn't signed those deals where they own their masters, where they wouldn't be probably at the same place that they are today.
Right.
They would be forced to produce a record like every year and like tailored to the company that you work for. and not for your artistic vision. So I think that's one of the thing I think to like for the kids today, try to always own your material and not give it away. I think owning your masters is something pretty legit today to ask.
I think it must have been only for homework, because if I remember correctly, they signed to Virgin when they released Discovery.
I think it was with Virgin too, but even with Virgin, I think they had a lot of artistic freedom.
Yeah, you can tell that they
because they pretty much did what they wanted.
Yeah.
There were times that they wouldn't even tour. I think even if you look at Human After All, there wasn't that much like publicity around it. They didn't do much for the release. I think they were hoping that the album would speak for itself. You know,
when they released Homework, that is.
No, that when they released Human After All, I don't remember that there was a lot of like a big shebang or anything around it. It was, I think, like you talked about earlier, that the fact that they're like multi-dimensional, I think that's what they did to promote their albums. They would usually do like short films or like work with different producers, different Japanese producers. Like I don't know if you know, when they did Discovery, they did this movie called Interstellar 5555.
Yeah.
It was like a movie that was basically all about all the tracks that were on Discovery, and it was a guy named Matsumoto, I think. And like, do you know Matsumoto?
Well, I've heard that he's like the lord of anime or Japanese style comic.
You probably know him, but you don't know that it was him. Let's say if I tell you Astro Boy.
Yeah, of course.
That's him.
Oh, okay, wow.
If I tell you
so he's a legend.
If I tell you Captain Warlock.
I haven't seen that one though. Or is it Albator? Oh, yeah, Albator. Of course, I was a huge fan. My bad, everyone.
And that's that guy. So you see that influence from probably when they grew up and the people that they respected and how they were multidimensional, not only about their music, but also about, like you said, the branding, the robots, the different little movies and everything. So they were always striving to be a little bit different, to differentiate themselves from everyone else, while at the same time wanting to keep that artistic freedom to not be like everyone else.
Yeah. I mean, even in the Homework days, they did that. Like they hired Spike Jonze for the Daft Punk video, which was for me groundbreaking again. It was so weird. And plus the video wasn't all about the track. You heard the dog speak, and like it was completely left field at the time. Yeah. And then
also like Michel Gondry also afterwards.
Yeah, exactly.
For like around the world. So they were always like, they had a special insight of mixing. For them, art wasn't just like musical art. They wanted to transcend and to mix everything else and to get the best creators, to get the best visual artists, and to work with these guys. And that's what's interesting about Daft Punk, and which leave them with an incredible legacy, because they were like so multifaceted.
Yeah, and all these collaborators, maybe aside from Matsumoto, went on to become, superstars in their own right.
Exactly. They like Michel Gondry did videos for, I think, the White Stripes.
He did one of my favorite movies of all time, Eternal also. Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, which is just such a work of art of a movie. Yeah, so I feel like we could wrap this up with where they're at today. And you talked about at the very beginning of the podcast that your favorite album of all times might just be Tron Legacy. So why don't you enlighten us about what you feel like they did on that album that was, again, legendary?
it's kind of counterintuitive for Daft Punk because they go from making music in their bedrooms and making music for pretty much themselves to doing this huge soundtrack for this huge movie that was a Disney movie, right?
Out of basically nowhere, because
Well,
we Daft Punk fans were waiting for something, and then they come out with an orchestral soundtrack like that.
exactly. So, but it was kind of, like I said, counterintuitive for them because they were always fighting to have creative freedom and artistic freedom for making their stuff at their own pace and their own time and making everything by themselves. And now suddenly they get into this huge machine, orchestral music mixed with synthetic elements, working with an arranger, an orchestrator.
Joseph Trapanese. I looked up his name because I was like,
exactly.
Who's the guy who worked with them? Because he has some dope stuff too on there, like the way the ostinatos and all of the little string motifs that are really, really innovative in a way for the Hollywood soundtrack sound.
Yeah, it's very different. Exactly. Yeah. So in a way, they were kind of stretching their limits because now they were in this big machine. They couldn't just say we'll do whatever the fuck we want. You know, they had to tailor to the movie. They had to tailor to the orchestra. They had to find their place. So it must have been a little bit uncomfortable for them to do that. And I think they did it marvelously because if you listen to that soundtrack, I think the orchestral stuff sounds good, but it doesn't sound as good as with the synthetic elements. And the synthetic elements sound great also alone, but it's really, I think they found a way to make that perfect mix work together. Okay?
There's no soundtrack that really does it the way they did it. You know, mixing, it's old school 80s synth music with orchestral textures and stuff.
And so for me, it was so well balanced. That's what's impressed me so much about it. So they're using like an 85-piece orchestra on that soundtrack. So it's pretty incredible that they could have that.
And what really struck me when I first listened to the soundtrack and then the movie was the fact that it does sound Daft Punk.
Yeah,
like
exactly.
Nobody else could have come up with those melodies, and it's really them. There's the DNA all over the soundtrack, really.
Exactly. And that's what's incredible about these guys. It sounds like them from the moment they touch it. It sounds like them.
Yeah. And also, let's not forget the big banger, the Resd. That
of course, with the big drums.
Kind of brought back some of that homework flavor in there.
Yeah, like raw instrument, raw stuff. Like you can hear those, like 808, 909. You can hear those raw sound, those 80s snare popping and snapping. So it's incredible.
It has that rolling and scratching evolution throughout the song. It's
exactly very interesting and inspiring soundtrack.
All right, so how do you want to wrap this up, Beak?
Well, how can we wrap this up? I think we should wrap this up and say that we omitted to talk about one album that's called Random Access Memory. And I think, if you agree, I think we should do a podcast just on that album because it's got so many goodies that we could talk about for a while, at least for another podcast. And but for this one, so that's for our next podcast. But for this one, I'm gonna say grab our stuff on delicatebeats.com. Get on the newsletter if you're not already subscribed. You can follow us on our Instagram account, the Facebook page, all the good places. Don't forget to subscribe to this podcast. And like you would say, see you next week.
Absolutely. I'll just invite our listeners to listen to my favorite track of the moment by Daft Punk. So if you listen to Alive 2007, listen to track number 10. It mashes up Prime Time of Your Life, Brainwasher, Rollin' and Scratchin', and Alive. It's a 10 minute and 22 seconds long song, and I think that it captures everything that I love so much about the duo. So do me a favor, go on your Spotify or your Apple Music, listen to track number 10. It is something else.
All right, guys. So for all the robot geeks out there and gearheads out there, we're going to wish you a great week. Stay inside, make more beats, make more music, and we'll see you next week.
We will indeed. See y'all next week.
Peace out.
Na 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 na